First action business is roll call.
Teresa Taylor.
Here.
Richard Costigan. Rob Fechner. Richard Gillahan. Henry Jones. David Miller. Lynn Paquin for Betty Yee.
Okay. I'd go ahead and move on to the executive report, and I'm going to ask Ms. Marlene Timberlake Diadamo to go ahead and do that.
I had written good morning, but it's now good afternoon. So, good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. Marlene Timberlake Diadamo, Calpers team member. I'm serving as the officer in charge for the Chief Financial Officer, and as officer in charge, I will be conducting today's Finance and Administration Committee meeting. Before we get started, I wanted to take this opportunity to provide an update on committee direction provided at the April meeting. The team is reviewing the board member employer reimbursement process. We plan to come back to the committee in the following months with the process and reporting definitions, as instructed by you. Additionally, the legislative team is reviewing your request to look at the monthly stipends for retiree and appointed board members for possibly the next legislative cycle. This brings me to the agenda before you today. We have 6 action items for your consideration. We will start this afternoon with the second reading of the 2018-2019 annual budget proposal. The second item is the asset and liability transfer to the San Bernardino County Employees Retirement Association, SB-SARA. The third is a request for an extension of the third-party administrator contract for the supplemental income plans programs. In addition, we have 2 legislative updates, one on Assembly Bill 1912, Public Employees Retirement, Joint Powers Agreements Liability. The second is the Senate Bill 1413, Public Employees Retirement, Pension Pre-Funding. Our final action item is the amended notice of election for the 2018 Calpers Board of Administration, state, school, and public agency elections. We will conclude today's agenda with one information item, the annual Stakeholder Perception Survey Report. The next Finance and Administration Committee meeting is scheduled for September 25th, 2018, here in Sacramento, and will include a report on the participating employers and the annual actuarial valuation for the terminated agency pool. Thank you, Madam Chair. This concludes my report, and I would be pleased to take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Timberlake Diadamo. I'd also like to note in attendance our other board members, Ramon Rubalcaba, Matthew, I'm trying to see. Seha for the treasurer, Margaret Brown, Dana Hollinger, Ms. Priya Mother, and that's it, right? Nobody on that side? Oh, wait. Okay. And Mr. Gillahan is here. All right. So that moves us to agenda item 3, consent item, action items. It's been moved by Mr. Jones. It was seconded by Mr. Miller. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. All those opposed? All right. The action carries. Thank you. And that moves us on to agenda item 4, action consent items, information consent items. I had nothing pulled, so then we are going to move on to agenda item 5. And that's accounting, financial reporting, and budgeting. And I believe that's Ms. Timberlake Diadamo again.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon. The Calpers fiscal year 2018-19 annual budget proposal is being presented today as a second reading. The proposed fiscal year 18-19 Calpers total budget of $1,681,000 represents an overall increase of approximately $4.8 million or 0.3% from the fiscal year 2017-18 approved budget of $1.676 billion. The budget includes no change in authorized positions, which remains at 2,875. The fiscal year budget proposal is comprised of operating costs of $1.647 billion, enterprise project costs of $9.6 million, and headquarters building costs of $24.4 million. As mentioned, no new authorized positions are proposed, as the organization will continue to address resource needs through realignment of existing positions. Based on comments from committee members during the first reading, the following have been included in the second reading. On page 44 of your board books, we included the footnote regarding explaining the total budget decrease from 2015-16 actuals to the 16-17 actuals, which is, as I mentioned, is page 44 of your board books. The 2018-19 proposed budget is aligned with the strategic plan and business plan objectives to fund sustainability, healthcare affordability, reduce complexity, risk management, and talent management. In summary, Calpers recommends approval for the proposed fiscal year 18-19 budget of $1.681 billion and 2,875 positions as a second reading, along with the transmittal to this committee for board approval. Thank you, Madam Chair. This completes my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
All right. I have one question from the committee so far. Oh, wait. There you go. Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Not a question, just a comment. I want to thank you for the follow-up information we received coming off of our last meeting. And with that, I move approval.
Great. Approval of staff recommendation was moved by Mr. Jones, seconded by Mr. Gillihan. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay. All those opposed? Motion carries. And we are moving on to agenda item 6. So this is Ms. Page, Ms. Timberlake Diamato, and Mr. Tarondo. Are you there? Oh, no?
Nope.
Somebody else? All right. Go ahead.
Yes. I'm going to turn this over to Arnita.
Good afternoon. Arnita Page, Calpers team member. Agenda item 6A is an action item. Here presenting with me is Carrie Morgan, a supervising pension actuary.
I don't have any.
We recommend the committee adopt the transfer agreement of membership benefits representing approximately $4,276,500 to be transferred to SB Sarah. In March 2018, the Big Bear Community Service District requested the transfer of the retirement benefits for their active safety employees to SB Sarah. The law provides the authority for the board to enter an agreement with the County Retirement Systems Board. Additional background information was provided in the agenda item. The attached agreement for transfer of membership benefits was reviewed by all parties and is similar to prior agreements the board has approved for benefit transfers. The board has the discretion to approve the transfer request. The district's board did sign the transfer agreement on May 7th and provided a copy to us for your consideration. And lastly, the impacted members do support this transfer, and we're here to answer any questions.
So this is an action item, but I do have a request to speak. Mr. Costigan?
Actually, you answered my question, which is the membership has the individual members have agreed to it. We've heard no objections. So
Yes,
with
sir.
that, I would move staff recommendation.
It's, the action's been moved by Mr. Costigan, seconded by Mr. Jones. Seeing no discussion on the item, all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. So we are on agenda item 6B, extension of third-party administrator contracts.
Yes, good afternoon. Arnita Page, Chief for the Pension Contract Management Service, is here to assist me in presenting this item. The Financial Office is requesting an 18-month extension for the third-party administrator contract for the Supplemental Income Plan program that is due to expire July 31st, 2018. The approval of the extension will allow sufficient time to conduct a formal RFP for this contract that is currently held by Voya Financial Services, and it'll also give us time to implement the new contract if a new vendor is chosen. In 2016, we received a 2-year extension from the committee. The extension provided time to review the program because at the time in 2016, this body of work was being moved from another area within Calpers and came over to the financial office. At that time, we conducted a review and went out for an RFI to see if there were any other vendors that would be interested in this body of work. At the time, we had sent it out to 6 vendors. 2 responded, one of which was the current contractor, Voya. And having gone through all of this and having a longstanding relationship with Voya, whom, by the way, we're very satisfied with, but given that it is a very longstanding relationship, we really would like to go out for an RFP to validate the fees and the services that were being provided to make sure that we're really getting our money's worth in this endeavor. I will note that Voya has consistently provided excellent service to 791 contracting agencies and approximately 36,000 participants. Because of the limited response to the RFI, our next step is to work with a consultant to develop the RFP that will improve our market's response to the request. The cost of the extension will be funded through our budget, and this concludes our presentation. We're happy to answer any questions should you have any.
All right, this is also an action item. I do have a request to speak. Mr. Costigan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I think I had expressed my concerns earlier that it's an 18-month contract. I'd rather see it done in 12, but I guess the bigger concern I have is if you only had one vendor last time, why do you believe that changing it and even extending it to 18 months, that we're going to get more than one person inside the pool? I mean, I just want to know what situation has changed other than just Voya. I mean, does the 18 months, I'm sorry?
What we'd like to do is take the additional time to develop our RFP in a way that perhaps will be attractive to other vendors. What we have found is that perhaps our RFP, the way that it's worded and the terms that we're asking for, is not as attractive, which is why, could be one reason why we're receiving so few interested parties. So we'd like to take the opportunity with a consultant to actually structure an RFP that might be a little bit, what's the word, more attractive, I guess, for a vendor to pursue.
So the current contract expires when?
July 31st, 2018.
Okay. So they are, in fact, getting a sort of a no-bid contract for 18 months?
It's an extension of our existing contract.
Okay. And now, will this be the first extension that's been granted?
No,
or the second?
go ahead.
No, this is actually the second extension we're requesting.
The original contract was from 2011 to 2016. At the time that the contract was expiring in 2016, we were undergoing a shift in the body of work that was moving from the program area up to the financial office. And with that shift occurring at the same time, we really came to this committee to ask for an extension to do a review of the program and to make sure that we really understood what we were doing in terms of the work and the vendor. And so we had, in the intervening 2 years since we got the extension, gone out for the RFI. We'd sent it to 6 vendors. We gotten 2 responses, one of which was Voya. And at the time really decided that because Voya is still in the hunt, I'll say, and it's a long-standing relationship, we really wanted to validate the work in awarding them with another contract with being able to prove the concept that they're actually the right vendor for us.
All right. I did note that we did get a fee reduction on the last extension. Does that continue under the terms of the 18-month extension, or is there a fee increase?
I don't believe there's a fee increase.
No, there's no fee increase.
Okay, thank you. All right, with that, I'll move staff recommendation.
So this is an action item. It was moved by Mr. Costigan, seconded by Mr. Jones. Seeing no discussion, all those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. I had a request, and I apologize, Mr. Lynn, to speak. I'm sorry, Mr. Budger, it looks like. Is that Budger?
No, on budget. Mr.
On
Lynn,
budget.
On 5A.
Mr. Lynn on 5A. I'm sorry. So if you want to come down on 5A and speak, Mr. Lynn, are you still here, George? There you are. Yeah, make sure.
Board members are going to think I'm getting my exercise coming to the table here. My name is George Lynn. I'm president of the Retired Public Employees
We start the
Association. Good afternoon, Chairman Teresa and committee members, board members. I wanted to speak on the budget just in general terms. At one point in time, I was a controller for an organization, so I had to put together not a budget with this many zeros behind it, but nevertheless a budget that was in the tens of millions. So I always take a look at where I think the smoke is hidden, and I certainly don't like this discretionary item. If you take a look at the budget, you'll see that, you know, salaries are up 6, and then if you take the investment stuff and lump it together, it comes out fairly close to 0, and so then the rest of it is project costs and building and so on. But I'm concerned about this discretionary thing. One of the things that's happened over the last several years is every opportunity Calpers seems to find to charge our members for certain things that they had been receiving free of charge that comes through the systems. If we're talking about a lot of labor, yes, that's a cost. Something coming through the systems, I don't think has much cost. So when I look at this budget and I see that discretionary item, I just want the board to understand that we as an organization are going to watch closely to see where the hidden things pop out, because we think while the budget is reasonably sound, there obviously are places that we are concerned about. So I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Lynn. Seeing nobody else requesting to speak on 5A, I'm going to move on to 6C. And that is Assembly Bill 1912, Public Employees Retirement Joint Powers Agreements Liability. And Mr. Pacheco and Mr. Jacobs is supposed to be up here.
I think I'm going to handle it,
You're gonna
Madam
handle
Chair
it?
and members of the committee, yes. If we need Matt to come up to answer questions, we can. Good afternoon. We're bringing 2 legislative bills to the committee today for consideration. The first bill is Assembly Bill 1912, authored by the chair of the Assembly PERS Committee, Assemblymember Rodriguez, and sponsored by SEIU. We've discussed this bill in this committee before as it relates to the pension liabilities of joint power agreements, or JPAs, and it's going to be heard tomorrow in the Assembly Appropriations Committee. Before I get into the details of the bill, let me begin by saying that I think it's a fair and accurate statement that this organization, Calpers, our member associations, both active and retired, and all of our employers, do not want to see a member's pension reduced. There's mutual agreement that we don't want to be faced with cutting a member's pension, as this organization had to do last year. How we protect our members as it relates to JPAs and consider policy changes that may impact them and our employers is still being debated. We've provided you a number of copies of letters from various groups expressing their concerns and questions around this legislation. And there have been significant amendments in the last week since we wrote this agenda item, so I want to take a moment to provide a high level of the major provisions. The latest version no longer requires that CalPERS file a civil action against the JPA member agencies for payment of its obligations. It does say that we need to exhaust all measures and consider a civil action, but not require it. The new amendments apply joint and several liability provisions prospective only to new JPAs entering the system after January 1st, 2019. And just to remind the committee, we already require that as part of our contracting process for new JPAs. And the new version also creates a process to apportion liability for existing JPAs in the system, and requires CalPERS to step in if the parties can't agree. So since this bill has gone through a number of amendments, we're still looking at the language, both our program and legal areas. I think it's appropriate for this committee to go down one or a couple of paths to take a position on this bill as outlined in the agenda item. You can also provide direction to the legislative team to continue to work with the stakeholders around the language, and we could come back to you in June. So I'll stop there and answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Brad. I appreciate it. That's new news even since I think we last spoke. So one quick question. One change in the language was that it's now it's not going back to current existing JPAs, it's only prospective?
It is prospective, and it would be joint and several liability, but it does include the retroactive provision. But under the retroactive provision, it would be apportions liabilities between the member agencies. If they can't decide how to apportion that, then Calpers would step in.
Okay. So it does actually call for that. And then additionally, there was the pulling out of the requirement for Calpers to sue, correct?
Correct.
Okay. I'm leaning towards working with our stakeholders a little longer, but I have a bunch of people that want to talk first. So
Sure.
let me call on Mr. Costigan, Vice Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just a few questions, Mr. Pacheco. I mean, we're still in first house. I understand it's a little early. It is my understanding that the proponents and the impacted agencies, local agencies, are having discussions. I think it would be my preference to wait until June to take action on this, because I have some questions that are still out there. The sort of some of the legal issues, I think, have not, and I want to say nice analysis. I appreciate the work was done, and I was reading the committee analysis and the appropriations analysis earlier today, and there are a lot of unanswered questions. I think the mutual goal of protecting the members, I mean, this all, let's just remember the reason we're here is because of East San Gabriel and what went on there. And it's trying to reach a mutual agreement for the benefit of the employees. What I'm concerned about is making sure you have what is it that we currently do? It's my understanding there are certain things in the system that we're currently able to do, such as new JPAs coming in, how we address some current other JPAs. I think one of the questions is, as we've talked about, is the inventory of not just JPAs, but what other entities. We're going to have a holistic approach to addressing this situation. The JPAs just happen to pop up, but there might be some other factors that are out there. And I think, as the chair indicated, we'll continue to work over the next few weeks. So I just wanted to say at this time, I'm not prepared to support the bill. I support the concept. I think we're still early in first house. I know we're in the fiscal committee second house, or fiscal committee first house, waiting for the bill to go to second house to continue to work through it. But I do want to applaud you, Mr. Pacheco, your staff, for the work that you have done, and the proponents and those working on it. So with that, Madam Chair, I'll have some questions after. I would like, when the folks come up to address, I have the questions on retroactivity and on the legal reach back I'd like addressed. And Mr. Jacobs, we may talk about that after the questions. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Mr. Jones.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the work on this, and I see it is a moving target, if you will. And I appreciate this coming before us in this timely manner, because you may recall that I was one of the members said that we should impose some kind of parameters around these sponsoring agencies, that they would incur the liability if, in fact, the JPA was to go under. So I applaud all of that. I didn't think through when I requested this about the retroactivity, and seeing this, and I think Mr. Costigan made reference to it, is that it's a lot of issues maybe need to be explored around that, about what happens when a former contributing agency no longer exists. And it was 5, for example, and now it's only 4. So do the 4 then absorb the responsibility of the 5th who's out? So it's a whole host of issues that I think need to be addressed in terms of retroactivity. But certainly I applaud you for moving on this, and hopefully some clarification can be made on that retroactivity, because just looking at it from where I sit now, it seemed like it's a whole host of problems that would surface that we wouldn't be in control of. And so I hate to have the responsibility for something that I can't control. So that would be my comments.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Jones. Ms. Paquin for Ms. Yee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to also thank the staff and the bill's sponsor and the stakeholders for working together on this. It's such an important issue, and it's been a high priority for the controller as well, too. We also do have some concerns, though, about the legality of some of the retroactive issues with the bill, so also supportive of taking the next couple of weeks to work through that. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Mr. Slayton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm glad that looks like we're moving toward working on it further and waiting and see. This is a very fluid situation. I've expressed to others that I have the similar concern regarding the retroactivity issue, but I also have concerns about the issue of liability and how that would get apportioned, whether it's joint and several or whether it's proportional. And I'll just give you 2 examples. The Northern California Power Agency has 16 members. Agencies that are members of it. The Peninsula Clean Energy is San Mateo County plus 20 cities. So, you know, how you work through those issues maybe has a great deal of complexity that may not be fully thought out. So I'd be in favor of just seeing what happens in June and following this legislation, see how the stakeholders are able to work through to reach some accommodation that advances the cause of people being able to be assured of their retirement.
All right, thank you, Mr. Slayton. Ms. Brown.
Thank you. I believe that for AB 1912 to be effective, it must include retroactivity for protection of employees. You know, these employees had no idea when they left their public agency to join this JPA that they could potentially have their pensions cut dramatically. And I think the complexity can be resolved, because if you don't resolve it, it means you're going to cut employees' pensions. What was it in East San Gabriel, up to 70%? I mean, it was absolutely tragic for those workers, and we cannot forget, though, those public agencies can find the money to pay the pensions and make those employees whole. I mean, these people are 70 and 80 and 90. I mean, they cannot go back to work and make more money. And we can't forget that. We can't forget them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. I do want to concur with Ms. Brown, and I also agree. I think we all started exploring this avenue to begin with because of how it impacted us to have to cut these pensions, and having the member cities and counties for these JPAs completely deny any kind of responsibility made me think that they were like some kind of large corporation and behaving as such, and, you know, under the law. So I think it's time we protect our workers against something like this. Nobody, and my members weren't even impacted for this, but every member, I'm sure, and I think I even read about it in the Sacramento Bee today, when they heard about the reduction of those pensions, was terrified that their pensions were at stake. So this has to be resolved. In the meantime, we do have requests for speakers. I'm going to call 3 at a time. And you can come sit up here to my left. It would be to your right. So it's George Lynn, Dane Hutchings, and Dorothy Johnson first.
Perfect.
Again, my name is George Lynn. I'm the president of the Retired Public Employees Association. Good afternoon, Ms. Taylor, Chair, and committee members, board members. We're one of the folks that you see on the list of sponsoring this. We feel it's very important. We've been in contact with the individuals down at LA Works since the very beginning of this fiasco. And Ms. Brown, you're very close. According to Kay Ford, the loss was 63%. And I think that she should know, since she's one who is looking at her bank statement. And that they had been employed by the agency for 15 to 35 years, these employees. There's a little confusion. Having talked with a couple of the community folks, this bill relates to JPAs that have a contract of their own with Calpers. So if a city or a county loans people to a JPA and continue to include them as their employee and pay their pension, if City A goes out of business, that has no effect on City B, because that employee for B is no longer, is not part of City A's employment. So this applies only to the JPAs that have independent, standalone agreements with Calpers, and I think there's a confusion there. I think that the issue about retroactivity, yes, we're working very hard with Kay Ford because, that's a devastating thing. We started this chopping of pensions way back with Loyalton and so on. And I think that we need to find a way to make certain that those individuals that have worked and all of a sudden find themselves in this JPA situation with no pension or tremendously reduced pension have some protection. And as I said, it's only those that work for a JPA that has an independent contract agreement and is a contract agency with Calpers. If the JPA doesn't have that, they're not part of this problem. Their problem relates back to their city and county where they came from. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hutchings?
Good afternoon, Chair and members. Dane Hutchings with the League of California Cities. First off, I want to start off by saying that we completely agree with my colleague here that LA Work should have never happened. And we all want to ensure that retirees are taken care of. Unfortunately, AB 1912 doesn't solve that for LA Works, nor does it solve it for some of the other folks. I think one of the most problematic provisions has been touched on by most of the members of the board is the retroactivity of apportioned liability. There are JPAs with as many as hundreds of agencies, and so trying to retroactively assign some sort of sense of apportioned liability would be incredibly challenging for those agencies to do. And so if they don't come, if they cannot come to agreement, then the retirement agency would then impose their methodology of apportioned liability. I would presume that most of those agencies would contest the retirement agency's discretion as far as their apportioned liability, which would lead to more litigation. And so again, it doesn't solve the issues. We have been actively working, I could say for the League of Cities, I've been actively working with the chief consultant of the Assembly Purse Committee as well as the author directly on trying to find some concepts around that can solve the issue without applying a retroactive portion of liability. I can tell you that if this board were to move today to support this measure, it really does hamper our ability to continue to negotiate with the author and sponsors. It would put us at a disadvantage as far as being able to negotiate a reasonable solution. Again, I want to echo the fact that Our cities certainly do not want to see what happened in LA Works happen again, but we want to give us some time to work with the stakeholders to see if we can come to a reasonable solution. You're going to hear from a few more of my members later on to talk specifically about some of the challenges that this bill would face that would have on their ability to operate their cities and provide regional services to their communities should this become law. So again, we ask that the committee hold off action on this item today to allow the league and other employers to work with the author and sponsor on alternative solutions to ensure that retirees' pensions are protected. I know that Mr. Costigan had some questions. I'm happy to stick around and answer questions, or y'all can just call me back up. I'm happy to answer questions if you have them. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so I'm going to hit all of you, and then at the end of that, I'll have Mr. Costigan ask some questions. Ms. Johnson.
Thank you. Dorothy Johnson with the California State Association of Counties. I want to thank Mr. Pacheco for opening this whole conversation and reiterating what my colleague and other sponsors said, that our best interest is to protect the benefits of the members of the system. And that is what I think we're all trying to do. But respectfully, AB 1912 does not offer that solution. I'd offer instead it creates unintended consequences and something that is truly unworkable, and we'll leave it to our local officials to explain why in greater detail. So we are respectfully requesting that this body do not take action today and delay until June. We may have a solution that may not even require legislation, which would allow us, I think, to really find a comprehensive way to secure benefits for all the members and not place at risk not only JPAs, but also the fiscal solvency of the counties, special districts, and cities that they are partnering with, or even perhaps the state. I'm happy to answer any questions, but in light of the recent amendments, in light of our efforts to move forward on a collaborative solution, and in light of the fact it is still very early in the legislative process, do ask that a vote is delayed on this measure. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Gibbons.
Chair, members of the committee, Dylan Gibbons with the California Special Districts Association. I'd like to echo the comments of my colleagues from the League and CSAC. Not too much to add on there. We agree that what happened with LA Works was terrible. We want to and we are actively working on trying to come up with a solution to prevent that from happening again and prevent this board from being put in that situation to have to make those cuts to employee benefits. It was a terrible thing. We do ask that you put over taking a position on this bill at this time. We are looking to craft amendments that hopefully can solve the issue. But this bill at this time is not it. So with that, thank you very much.
Sure, thank you. I also want to just say, I think Mr. Hutchings, I just wrote it down. You want to work on an amendment so that the bill has going forward without retroactive liability. Did I hear that correctly?
So the issue, I think the heart of our issue is the retroactivity of apportioned liability. I think Mr. Slayton mentioned the fact that there are some complications. I mean, there's JPAs out there that have as many as hundreds of agencies coming in and leaving. And so the fundamental question comes up as how do you assess liability to an agency when liabilities are growing when that agency was never even a part of that JPA? So it's highly complicated on the retroactivity piece. I think that there is some out-of-the-box sort of ideas that we have that we're still trying to explore and flesh out in a way to try to really take more of a scalpel to this issue more than a sledgehammer, if you will, but try to look at some of these agencies that are at risk and assess their specific liabilities and the agencies that are a party to those JPAs and try to be proactive on this to try and figure out ways to ensure that those retirees are taken care of. I think just blanket retroactive liability really is the heart of our opposition. I know that the retirement boards, including Calpers, moving prospectively, are already establishing liability on the front end, which is great because then agencies can come together and they know what they're getting into. It's when you try to go backwards that's really the biggest challenge. So we're trying to figure out a way to ensure that happens.
Okay, so I guess I'm a little confused. There aren't that many JPAs, and you're talking about JPAs with hundreds of member agencies. How many of those are there?
I don't know how many of those there are, but we know that there are some. On that list of 167 that you included, those include risk pool JPAs who do have hundreds of members. They also have liability assigned in those, but that wasn't listed in the 10 JPAs that you have.
So they already have liability.
Yes, but it was not listed on your form that said that there were only 10 JPAs that had that liability. They weren't included on that list. So there are a number of JPAs of the 167 that do have liability assigned that aren't. What's that?
Right. Then the law that we're talking about right now, AB 1912, wouldn't apply to those.
It applies. It would. The way that this is drafted now, it would apply to all of them.
To all JPAs, regardless of what retirement system they're in, not just Calpers, but any retirement system.
Okay. So my concern is not making, and I'm going to move on to Mr. Costigan here for questions as well. My concern is not making any part of this law ends up like LA Works, where they tell us over and over again, we're not responsible. This is, not me, you're it. And then our members suffer. So I think we have a real problem. I don't have a problem with you guys working on this, but if the end result of you working on this is getting rid of retroactive, I'm not sure that I'm willing to go there.
Chair, if I may, and we agree. We want to make sure that this covers everyone, and that every employee would be covered. As far as I think what my colleague was referring to is a blanket removal of retroactivity. One of the things that we've been looking at is our JPAs that are now larger than the member agencies that are members, where maybe there's 3 member agencies, and the JPA has greater assets and employees than the member agencies. Applying liability to those member agencies would not help serve those employees. So in that case, they would need to have a different application, and this law would be structured. It sounds like you have some
little carve-outs.
Right. So
right?
And that's what we're working on. We're trying to find a solution that would work in all cases.
Okay. And Mr. Costigan.
All right, thank you.
And you went away. Hold on. Push your button again.
No, it's lit up. There you go.
It is lit up.
So actually, you addressed a few of the questions. So again, what I wanted to go back over was, well, first is we all agree what the goal is. The goal is to protect the member. So, I mean, some of the, I always hate these terms, but the low-hanging fruit that we still need to look at is the notice and disclosure. Right? What we've realized in East San Gabriel is many of the members didn't know who they were actually working for. Okay? Then you look at sort of a second question that we talked about, which is contractual relationship versus revenue source, right? I mean, that's one of the issues, is if the JPA has independent revenue-making authority, not necessarily an issue, sort of step in the shoes, because again, East San Gabriel was based on a contractual relationship. So what I'm somewhat concerned about or confused is when we talk about addressing those employees that may be part of the contractual relationship, you never get past the retroactivity. Right? I mean, but the retroactivity is actually a legal issue that may cause the entire bill to collapse. I mean, I'm just trying. There's the goal, and this is not a negotiation on a bill. These are just some question I'm raising. It's the goal is to protect the employee. The problem is the retroactivity creates the issue, because it's also my understanding, and Mr. Hutchins, please correct me, is that if the bill were to adopt in its amended form, the form currently before appropriations, you would increase the liability of local governments because I didn't hear you all address that.
Correct. So for example, if we use, and I believe there is a representative from Northern California Power Authority that may be able to be a little bit more specific. So excuse me if I'm being a little bit general, but from my understanding, the Northern California Power Authority, for example, has 16 member agencies. You have an agency. I went to the liberty of kind of Googling and I found some CAFRs, and for example, the city of Gridley, who is in the Northern California Power Authority, they have an annual operating general fund of $3 million. The Northern California Power Authority has assets in excess of $1.2 billion. And so again, when you're assessing retirement, and I believe Northern California Power Authority, in their most recent actuarial, said it had about a $67 million unfunded liability. Yet they have $1.2 billion in real assets. So they're not in jeopardy of defaulting. However, when you apply retroactive apportioned liability, I mean, even if you were just to evenly divide it between 16 agencies, you'd be having the city of Gridley inherit a $4.5 million liability on their books when they only have a $3 million operating budget. I mean, they would be getting that liability all in 1 year, even if it's
just a clarifying question then. Prospective apportionment is okay or still problematic?
So if it's prospectively apportioned, I believe we would be okay with that, because each agency at the time that they're creating this organization or this independent organization would know, they would kind of know the rules of the game when they're getting into it.
Only prospective apportionment for new JPAs coming into the system.
So if any new, and again, whether that's codified through state law or not, that's, it's a regardless, because any new JPA prospectively moving forward has to have some sort of liability clause in their contracts. Calpers has made that clear, as has other retirement agencies. It's looking at trying to assess it retroactively to a multitude of agencies. And quite frankly, I don't know if, for example, NCPA, if they've had member agencies enter and exit that JPA in the last, 30 or 40 years. I don't know, but if they did, those former members are also on the hook for a certain percentage of liability. So conceivably saying all current and former members, you get in a room and you all mutually agree on how you're going to apportion liability. If not, we're gonna apportion liability. I think it's a no-win situation on that for in that particular example.
Great. All right. Thank you for right now. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. Seeing no further requests from the board to speak, I'd like to call the next three requests to speakers from the public: Donna Colson, Anna Rizma, and John Healy. All right, Donna Colson, Ms. Colson.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the board. My name is Donna Colson, and I am the Vice Mayor of the City of Burlingame. JPAs have played a vital role in addressing public needs in a cost-effective manner that cannot be effectively achieved by a local agency acting on its own. For nearly 15 years, Burlingame has used a JPA structure to partner with neighboring cities, first Hillsborough and then later Millbrae, so that we can deliver outstanding fire service that has saved tens of millions of dollars. At a time when Calpers has lowered the expected actuarial investment rate of return, resulting in larger unfunded liabilities and increased pressure on employer contribution rates, we at the City of Burlingame are in dire need of these savings, and Burlingame is using these excess proceeds to aggressively fund a newly formed 115 pension trust account so that we can smooth impending contribution cost increases and protect our current active workers. We understand the need to hold cities accountable for their pension liabilities and support an amended AB 1912 that would still give the retirement agency unilateral authority to assign an equitable pro rata share of liability amongst current and former JPA members in the unlikely event that agencies cannot agree on how to apportion liabilities. As written, this vague and ambiguous direction will inevitably lead to a cycle of protracted and costly litigation, contesting the retirement agency's discretion of proportional liability. This is a departure from the current law and would effectively eliminate the JPA structure, and the City of Burlingame is deeply concerned that JPAs would no longer be a viable tool for cost-saving efficiencies should AB 1912 become law. We ask that the board adopt a no position on this bill to allow cities to work with the author and find feasible alternative solutions that would maintain pension solvency in a fair and equitable manner. This would help us to continue the JPA structure, which creates efficiencies and cost savings, some of which we are using to help manage our rising pension costs. My background is similar to yours. I have 25 years of pension management experience. In fact, over the years, I actually consulted to Calpers on the investment portfolio. And I served for a decade on the San Mateo County Employees Retirement Association board in your chair. My family are all union. My mother's a member of stirs, so is my sister. I really understand this work, and I'm really committed to it. It's one of the reasons I ran for governmental office. But this particular situation and this particular bill would make it very unwieldy for us as the city, and we are trying desperately to pre-fund our pensions, and I hope you will continue to work with us to have a cost-effective solution so that we can reinvest in our city employees. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Colson. Ms. Ridsma?
Good afternoon, Chair and committee members and members of the board. My name is Ann Ritzma, and I am the Human Resources Director for the City of Foster City. I am here today to strongly encourage the board to take no position on AB 1912, as it continues to have significant impacts to local government's ability to provide cost-effective services through JPAs. AB 1912, as it is written and was recently amended, reduces the viability of a JPA as a tool for local government to provide shared services. I represent 3 cities, the city of Belmont, Foster City, and San Mateo, who have been working for the past 7 years to form the San Mateo Consolidated Fire Department JPA. The process has involved years of collaborative efforts between our elected officials, our labor groups, and staff to bring together a cost-effective, efficient fire service that provides outstanding fire services to our 3 communities. The key to bringing together the 3 departments has been the JPA's ability to contract with Calpers for our current existing pension formulas. We have been working with the Calpers staff for the past 18 months to finalize our JPA process and file an application for a new pension contract. The joint and several liabilities provision of AB 1912 has paused our consolidation process. As drafted, AB 1912 joint and several provisions would force each of our agencies to take on obligations that could exceed an individual's agency's fiscal authority. In our consolidated organization, we recognize our proportional obligations and responsibilities for the new pension liabilities of the agency, as well as other long-term obligations of the organization. We have included language in our JPA agreement to address our shared obligations and responsibilities. The provision of AB 1912 that would give a retirement agency unilateral authority to assign equitable liability amongst current or former JPA members would undermine the conversations that we've had to date between our 3 agencies. Our agencies also have a concern that, as drafted, AB 1912 will prohibit new agencies from joining an existing JPA because of the exposure to the liabilities of all unfunded obligations for the JPA. The additional exposure to legal action and liens on real assets also could provide a challenge. Our agencies have come together to form a consolidated fire service to provide our communities with exceptional fire and emergency services. The JPA model also provides cost savings to each of our agencies that is currently being used to cover increased Calpers employer contribution rates. The cities of Belmont, San Mateo, and Foster City are very concerned that JPAs will no longer be a viable option should this legislation pass. We ask that the board adopt a no position, and we are actively working to provide solutions through our partners to this legislation that will address both our agency's concerns and protect the retirement of our employees.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Ritzma. Mr. Healy.
Hi, Madam Chair and members of the board. I'm John Healy, the fire chief for San Mateo, Foster City, and Belmont currently. We're doing all this through a shared service agreement, and we're trying to become one by forming a JPA, which we did this past fall. We're trying to occupy or commence operations as that JPA, and this legislation has all 3 city attorneys recommending to the councils to hold on and wait and see because of the negative effects upon it. So what Ann Ritzma just shared with you, instead of repeating the same things, I'm just going to echo what she said and say I hope that you can take a no position on this today and give the process time to make that bill work better for all. Thank you.
So I'm a little confused. I'm going to call on you in just a second. I'm a little confused. You haven't yet formed your JPA, so you know that we are requiring joint and several liability for new JPAs going forward, right?
So correct. So we started the process about 7 years ago, and then in in January of 2017, we came up and met with Calpers staff and laid out all the steps that we needed to take. So we wrote a JPA agreement for all 3 city councils, and in it we addressed all the concerns that were raised by staff. Then just this year, now AB 1912 comes in and has joint and several liability spelled out to all obligations, and we had it written in our JPA proportional to each city. So we've already spelled out our proportional obligation of all 3 cities on what we'll pay and what we'll have forever on our debt. One of our member agencies, Belmont, was part of the old South County Fire Authority, who still pays on their former CalPERS obligations. So we know that the fire JPAs can be successful, and that they know that it's, till your grave, you own these obligations. No one's trying to get out of their obligations. I don't even like the comparison of, that we're a JPA similar to San Gabriel, but that's, unfortunately, JPAs are all being thrown in this same lump, and that's not necessarily what we are. So ours was approved by council. We are waiting for CalPERS to approve our application packet, and then this all took place. So we're kind of on a pause, waiting till we can find out if this is going to become law, and then our cities are going to say, don't commence operations.
So, and we'll ask a couple more questions. I'll also ask staff to look into that. I'm not sure that actually applies to going forward, but Mr. Costigan.
Actually, so we'll work in reverse order. Appreciate you all being here. If this is going forward, how are you impacted by 1912? How is this new JPA impacted? Either one.
Just the joint and several language, the city attorneys are recommended to the council that although we have it spelled out proportionally in ours, should one city it's telling the other 2 cities that they would be responsible for the 3rd city's obligation, when in fact each city is responsible for their own obligation, and the way we've wrote in our language to our agreement.
So I want to understand and appreciate again y'all being here, because I know it's a long drive up. So if the city of San Mateo
correct
were to walk away, okay, those employees, your firefighters that are inside of that JPA, okay, so since one city now says I'm no longer part of it, how are you going to ensure that your firefighters are fully compensated for their retirement if you're allowing San Mateo to walk away with no liability?
Well, we're not. In our JPA agreement, there's language that San Mateo's liable for 60% of the total of the JPA. But the 1912 basically would say is that Belmont and Foster City have to also be able to have enough funds on hand to cover San Mateo's loss should they hypothetically go bankrupt. And they can't honor their obligation. But, I mean, it's kind of, for an essential city services, we know this isn't going to happen. But I mean, I guess, hypothetically it could.
And then just a question to the HR, please. Is it a contractual or a revenue that is the JPA getting it through a fire service fee, or?
No, we're contractual.
Okay, so it is a contractual relationship.
It is.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Seeing no other questions from the board, I'd like to call up the next 3 speakers. And that's Laurie Sassoon, Isaac Moreno, and Jill Abel, or Abel. I'm sorry. I'm looking to see who else has to speak still. So, Laurie Sassoon?
Good afternoon, thank you. Yes, my name is Laurie Sassoon. I'm the Deputy City Manager for Administrative Services with the City of Rancho Cucamonga, and also a proud member of Calpers for 27 years. I want to thank the committee for the opportunity to speak and share a little bit about what's happening in Rancho Cucamonga and how this bill would impact us. As a mid-sized community, we rely on several JPAs to share expertise and costs with a number of our other agencies. For example, we are party to 2 JPAs for risk pooling, one of which has more than 200 member agencies. We're also part of a regional JPA for fire dispatch, and we're proud to say these JPAs are well run and well funded. With the important role that JPAs play in our cities, it is important that any legislation impacting them be very carefully considered. And at this time, we have a number of concerns, as our friends and other agencies do, regarding AB 1912 and how this may adversely impact this important form of government. We want to note that we do not disagree with the overarching goal of ensuring that pensions promised and earned are paid. However, this bill needs a great deal of work, and we respectfully recommend you take no position at this time and allow the stakeholders to work together on better solutions. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Sassoon. Mr. Moreno.
Thank you. Chair, committee, board members, thank you for allowing me to speak today. With the current action that Calpers has taken regarding discount rate and amortization schedule, a toll has been taken on our community as well as others. JPAs are an important tool that allow us to partnership with other entities to collectively help our communities and share the debt and the liability for providing services that we couldn't obtain on our own. With our current pension issues, we are looking at all and any tools available to us to weather this storm. By restricting our toolkit, you limit our options to stabilize our city. In addition, you limit the services that we can provide to our community. We are asking the board to adopt a no position on the AB 1912 to allow the stakeholders to work with the authors and find the alternative solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moreno. Ms. Abel?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members and board members. My name is Jill Abel. I'm the HR Director and Risk Manager for Yuba County. Thank you for hearing this issue today. And I just want to say, with steep increases in pension and other costs, public agencies are struggling to find cost-effective and creative ways to solve problems. And we're really afraid that in its current form, AB 1912 will put an end to local agencies' abilities to use JPAs as a viable tool to provide cost-effective services to the public that we are, serving. So today we're respectfully asking that this board take no position on this measure so that we can have some time to look at options and try to work together collaboratively on this issue.
All right, thank you. Seeing no request to speak from the board, I'm going to call the last two speakers up on 6C, and that's Austin Webster and Greg Cook. Oh, and Faith, I'm having a hard time reading this. Borges. You can come up as well. Thank you. And I'm going to call Austin Weber first.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Members, Austin Webster on behalf of the City of Hayward. In the interest of time, I will just align my comments with some of my colleagues. Like many local jurisdictions, the city faces some unique challenges in a limited budget, but we continue to provide high-quality service to our residents through the use of JPAs. In the actual bill language originally proposed, the author identifies JPAs as playing a vital role in addressing public needs. Unfortunately, this bill right now jeopardizes the use of that tool to address those needs. So we would align ourselves with everyone else in asking that this board at this time refrain from taking a position and allow us to continue to work with the author to find some viable solutions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cook.
Madam Chair and members, Greg Cook, representing the Northern California Power Agency. Our agency was the subject of some discussion with the first panel that you had up here, and if there are any specific questions that you would have of the agency's representative, I'd be happy to address them. We are celebrating our 50th anniversary this year. We have 16 local agency members. We have assets in excess of $1.5 billion. We certainly support the intent of Assembly Bill 1912. We're seriously concerned with some of the implementation. As your staff has reported, the bill is going to be heard tomorrow in appropriations. I'm told the bill is going to go on the appropriations suspense file, which isn't uncommon, and that during that time some additional amendments are going to be considered. So I think it would be premature to make a decision today based upon the bill in its present form, but I'd like to share with you what NCPA is doing. We recognize and acknowledge that we have an unfunded liability. We have put in place a 15-year plan. That plan calls for the payment and total payment of that unfunded liability. It calls for an annual audit of the status of that 15-year plan, and we offer to report the status and report the audit findings each year, along with a copy of the resolution signed by each of our members. We are committed to protecting our employees and their retirement benefits. We would hope that you would continue to give this legislation consideration. I personally have not met with your staff. I apologize for that. I'd like very much to meet with them to share with them the specifics of the NCPA plan, and I'd be happy to address any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Borges.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members. Faith Lane Borges on behalf of the California Association of Joint Power Authorities. You've heard a number of the witnesses here today speak about risk pooling entities, and that's who our membership is comprised of. So I'd like to share a little bit of history about how we came to be. And in the 70s and 80s, public entities found that they were not able to obtain insurance for their liabilities, such as tort liabilities, workers' compensation, general liability, and had a difficult time purchasing health benefits. So our members came together to utilize the JPA model to effectively self-insure for these liabilities, providing cost savings of in the range of 30 to 50% of having to purchase this coverage on the commercial market. As has also been shared by many of the members who spoke before me, we have concerns that this bill, as in print right now, would limit our ability to provide this very significant cost savings to all of our members, who include cities and counties, school districts, and other local public entities, special districts as well. We've been working very closely with the author because we understand, again, as has been stated, that this goal is very laudable, and we also want to protect members and their retirement obligations. I myself am a PERS member since 2012. But that being said, the bill in print right now, because of the reference to joint and several liability, which is a legal term that allows plaintiffs to sue any member for the entire liability, it gives a lot of members heartburn about joining JPAs and the vital services that we provide and the significant cost savings that are returned to our members to use for other things like their pension obligations and contributions, and we want to encourage that to continue. And if we are unable to exist because of this increased liability on all of our members, there was reference made earlier to some JPAs have over 500 members. Those are our types of JPAs because of the specific service model that we provide, yielding such great cost savings for those obligations that I mentioned earlier. With that alternative in mind, we're asking you to not take a position at this time, assuring you that we have the same goal of making sure pension obligations are met, but we need to do some working to get to more of an apportioned and fair allocation of what those retirement obligations are. We would also like to make ourselves available to you to answer any questions, but again, to assure you that we are working with the author and his staff to reach the intended goal, but make sure we don't have these unintended consequences, as we believe would be the effect of the bill in print.
All right, thank you. I have a board member that would like to speak. Mr. Miller?
This is not directed to any specific one of the commenters or board, but I appreciate that everyone understands the intent, the objective, that people have earned their benefits and they deserve to get them, whether they earned them in 1952, 1968, or 2018. And that is the goal. And so I would really encourage, if there are creative solutions, if there are alternatives, even if that introduces a level of complexity, because the unintended consequences we're concerned with and we're trying to prevent are devastating, as was mentioned earlier, tragic for our members of Calpers, whether they come to us by way of a joint powers agency or not. They're our number one concern. And so while I'm quite favorably disposed to the challenges that local governments, municipal governments, everyone are having in this economic environment, I will not be very favorably disposed if some solutions don't come up that can assure us that every one of those members who have served in joint powers agencies is not protected. And I'm more comfortable with unintended consequences of a solution where the unintended consequences, will be, frankly, those of the organizations that enjoyed the benefits, the significant financial and other benefits of being part of joint powers agreements now and in the past than the employees who became part of those and would be impacted. So I really encourage you to, work with the authors, work with our staff, and come up with something, because if you don't, I think I, for one, would be inclined to support the legislative effort to impose a solution that may not be optimal for you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. I'd like to call, we have 3 more requests to speak: Terry Brennan, Dan Schwartz, and Todd Cusimano from the town of Conta Madera? Corte Madera. I can't read the writing. Sorry.
Okay, go ahead. I expect to be grilled for a while.
So who wants to go first?
Okay.
Terry, Mr. Brennan.
I was going to let them.
You want to, all right.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Todd Cusimano, I'm the town manager for the town of Corte Madera. And I'm just going to focus on a couple of examples of the entire discussion today and try to narrow it in scope. And I think if I could summarize it, I think we're using the wrong tool, the wrong legislative tool. We all agree we need to do something, and we should be responsible as member agencies for our share. The joint and several liability language is like taking a sledgehammer into open heart surgery. I think Dane touched on it. It truly is. It's the wrong tool. And it's problematic, and I'll give you a couple examples of what I'm talking about. So the town of San Anselmo, that's in Marin County where we all work, we have many member agencies, JPAs. San Anselmo, they're miscellaneous employees. They have unfunded liability within their own town. They're also member agencies of members of 2 fire authority and police authority. So today, if you looked at what their unfunded liability is with retiree health as well, it's about $30 million. If you went back and you took the joint severable liability language and you did the retro, and I know things are changing, everything seems to be changing every week, but if you took joint severable and you went retro, in the situation that the town of San Anselmo's in, their unfunded liability would go from $35 million to over $100 million. They're a population of 13,000. Their operating budget is $18 million. That is what you're talking about up and down the state of California. In Marin County, we have a population of 260,000 people. We rely on JPAs to provide our essential core services: police, fire, sanitary. Joint several going backwards is just a deal breaker. You would destroy you destroy jobs, services, JPAs would no longer exist. Now, if we talk going perspective moving forward, we've worked with your staff. We're in the process, Puerto, Madero, and Larkspur, of forming a JPA, a fire authority similar to our police authority. And so for 8 months, we've been working with the Calpers staff and problem solving, going, what is the issue? Help us understand, and can we get to the table with our friends in the state to problem solve this issue, right? How do we figure out apportionment? Because it should be go backwards. We should handle that and we should be responsible for it. But what does it look like? I'll tell you right now, according to the staff of Calpers, that joint several is in play moving forward. It's also, it incurs all liabilities. So it's retiree health, it's civil, it's all liabilities. That is the stance of your staff right now, and that's why our GAPA is on hold, and we can't provide that service that we want to our communities. So if I could summarize it, I ask you to take no action. What is the rush? We need to do something, but this is a much greater, we're trying to solve something, it's a much greater issue, and we need to step back and find the right legislative tool. Joint several liability is not your tool. There are some tools out there, and that you've heard some really smart people in this room, really smart people on your staff. Let's work towards that, so thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Schwartz.
Thank you. My name is Dan Schwartz. I'm the city manager for the city of Larkspur. Puerto Madero is our neighbor. We're often referred to as the Twin Cities by Marin County residents. We collaborate in more than a dozen JPAs together and with other agencies in Marin and around the state. My agency participates in at least 6 more JPAs that are all solvent, all responsible, and those that have employees in retirement systems have made provisions to ensure that those people are taken care of. However, as Todd's already pointed out, the position of your staff, to clarify for Mr. Costigan, is that all liability will be joint and several, not just the retirement liability. And that's a serious problem. And in fact, we proposed to your staff that they only deal with retirement liability, and we were rejected on that point. The original iteration of AB 12, to speak specifically to your item, also spoke to all liability, not just to retirement liability. I've only heard you speak to retirement liability. I think that's understandable. That's what you should be concerned about. And I think what you're hearing from our colleagues from the League, CSAC, Special Districts Association, is they want to work on a solution with you that speaks specifically to retirement liability and gets us away from trying to look at all of the other liabilities and obligations that these solvent government agencies provide. I don't know if any analysis has been done by anyone else. I have 2 staff people doing analysis now on what AB 1912 would mean to the city of Larkspur. I've already notified one joint powers authority that we would withdraw if 1912 passes. I know other agencies are already in Marin looking at that. I'd submit to you that while I agree you need to protect the retirement benefits of your members, it won't do them any good if the JPAs dissolve and their jobs no longer exist. And I can think of at least 2 joint powers authorities that my agency belongs to that would likely dissolve and terminate those jobs upon the passage of AB 1912 as it stands. So for those who are interested in protecting your members, please keep that in mind. That is a major part of how they earn their retirement, is being employed. I have nothing else to add that hasn't been added before. We would very much like to solve this problem, but please don't destroy one of the most valuable tools to my city because of a bad actor in Los Angeles.
Thank you. I want to point out that as I'm reading this, it appears that right now Calpers is not, our staff is suggesting we don't back the bill because it doesn't include anything but pension liabilities. So that's right now as the bill stands. I just wanted to clarify that. Mr. Costigan.
So I've got a couple questions, and I'd also like our general counsel to come up. So I want to understand.
That would be a good time.
It would be a good time, of course. It would be. Thank you. All liabilities, I mean, we're generally looking at is health care and retirement. Would you expand on what you believe is it workers' compensation?
I'll speak more directly where I think the fire chief may not have had the benefit. I think we even share some of the same attorneys, so I've had this hammered into my head several times. The language being proposed by your staff is all of the joint liabilities and obligations of the JPA. I'm not talking about AB 1912. I'm talking about the language that they want inserted into the JPA so that we can obtain a contract. In the original iterations of 1912 were similarly structured. That's everything. That means that if Puerto Madero has brought other liabilities and obligations to the table as part of one of our partnerships that have nothing to do with the employment issue, we would potentially be open and subject to being sued for those obligations if Puerto Madero were to have a financial issue.
But if you were to limit it just to health care, retirement, and what's related to the employer, or excuse me, the employee, you'd be okay with that?
I'm not thrilled, but I can at least understand the logic of that. Okay. I can understand why Calpers would take that position.
Can we ask our general counsel, please, to opine on why we're using that provision?
Yes, the IRS actually requires that all obligations of agencies, JPAs in particular, that would want to be a member of Calpers be joint and several for them to come into the system without jeopardizing our tax-exempt status. So that's a big deal.
So the IRS requires, back over here to the city.
Hold on, I got that a little wrong, I can tell.
I want to make sure.
Yeah, that doesn't sound right.
Because it's everything or just...
Yeah, are we just talking pensions and health care, or are we talking everything?
I think we're talking everything, but let me refer to the expert here, Lisa Marie Hammond.
Lisa Hammond, Calpers team member. The IRS does require all debts and liabilities of the entities to be fiscally supported by the state or a political subdivision, not just the pension. It was very explicit on that point.
What does that have to do with this particular law, though?
With respect to, that's our position currently. With respect to the existing law, it's only limited to pensions, which would not satisfy the IRS factor.
What do we care?
We care, just, it's been a while, but back in 2011, the IRS came out with guidance, and we have subsequently aligned our contract eligibility process to align with the guidance in 2011 for two reasons. One, because we asked for a grandfather to say, for all the agencies in Calpers to date, can they stay in regardless of what they look like? If we say going forward, we apply a reasonable good faith interpretation of your rules, which would include requiring fiscal responsibility by the state or political subdivision for all debts, not just pension liabilities.
Sorry, just a few more questions so I can understand it. If the IRS already requires this, if this is what we've required for the last 5 years, what's different then? What?
I was making the point that I think you had a previous speaker who spoke to this point and confused you, and you expressed confusion about why he was telling you that his attorneys are having consternation with dealing with your staff. It's because, frankly, all of us belong to 12, 18, 24 joint powers authorities, and we've never been subjected to this before. And so to walk in 2017 and be told this is a new requirement has been a bit startling.
But I'm sorry, I hate the tennis aspect of it, but if this has been the requirement since 2011 by the IRS, what's different? That's why I don't understand. If this is what you're saying, the IRS requires this.
It does. We announced just in our circular letter, I believe it was later in 2012, it might have been early 2013, that we aligned the process. It took us about 6 months to a year to actually fully align. We've gone out with 2 circular letters to inform the community that's our new standard, and all new applicants complete the questionnaire.
It's not our standard, it's the IRS's
Correct.
standard.
And we aligned it with that, yes.
So could you just explain to me what's different? If that's what the standard is, that's what the IRS requires, and that's what we need to do to be in compliance. When you say all liabilities, what is, just so I can understand the difference?
I'm not disputing your staff saying this is what the IRS guidelines purport. I suspect the fire chief would join me in suggesting that not every city attorney in the state of California necessarily agrees with all of that interpretation. I'm not here to debate that today. I'm simply here to tell you that this language, as it moves forward, to suggest to smaller agencies that we can take on tens of millions of dollars in additional liability and book it in our audits is just something we can't do. My city is on the verge of going out to market for bonds. We need our bond rating to be sufficient to make sure that we get a good rate on those bonds. If I have to start showing in the audit all of the debts and obligations of all the joint powers authorities we belong to, we have no credit rating. That's a direct impact to the taxpayer. And once it gets out to the taxpayer that AB 1912 and or any other actions that we take are resulting in them paying $5, $6, $7 more dollars for the same thing they were buying for $1 in the past, they're going to be irate about that.
All right, thank you. That's it for now. Thank you.
Before I call on another board member, I'm going to call on Mr. Brennan.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. First, let me, I don't want to use all my 3 minutes thanking your staff, but I will. We've been working on this since January, all the way from your CEO down to your attorneys and the folks on making this bill more workable. We've also been working with the opponents that long, so I know they've asked for a month. I'm fine with that. I can't imagine what out-of-the-box idea they're going to come up with in the next 30 days that they haven't been able to generate on paper or even conceptually in the last 6 months. But let's do it. I'm willing to give it a shot. I wanted to address the concerns that the staff put in the analysis based on, by the way, the actual language in the bill now, which only about one of your speakers actually spoke to. And the 3 concerns primarily were removing the discretion of Calpers to litigate or not. The new amendments basically say litigation is part of the process you have to consider prior to reducing a benefit. Therefore, putting what you did in these other situations as a last resort. I've heard how complicated this is, how hard it is. You know what's not complicated? Cutting these people's benefit by 63%. That was too damn easy. I want it to be the last choice you have, not the first one. And we've amended it to the satisfaction of your legal staff, I believe. The second one is that JPA liability goes to whether they're eligible under the Internal Revenue Service. Because our proportional only refers to the existing ones, the existing JPAs are grandfathered, there's no conflict with the joint liability, which only applies going forward. The reason that language is in there, that was told to me to be your current practice. I'm putting in statute what your current practice is per the IRS regulations and your current operations. So it does not change anything going forward to a single JPA that would be forming. And then thirdly is this sort of conflict between proportional liability and joint and several liability. We've separated that by bifurcating the two populations. You currently have about 25,000 employees in 167 JPAs with zero protection. This bill's intended to go back and give you at least two options on how to deal with those employees. One is the members of the JPA get together and decide on their proportional liability. If they can't come to agreement, then you get to. And frankly, I don't care how you do it, as long as you get to 100. You can do it proportionally, you can do it by population, you can do it by service levels. We did not prescribe that in the bill for a reason, because it is complicated. You're absolutely right, Mr. Slayton. It's not an easy thing to do, which is why we put it on the member agencies to decide. And I've heard about these agencies with like the Joint Powers Agreement where there's 58 counties in it because it's a purchaser. Well, you know how many employees they have? 5. So it's the liability on 5 workers split between 58 counties. I think we can figure that out.
All right. Thank you, Terry. Don't go anywhere.
Question.
So, Mr. Slayton?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I think we've heard a lot of commentary on this. And Mr. Brennan, you've raised some very good points on this. But there's no question this thing is fluid still. And I've heard from enough local agencies that they're very concerned about this. And I think it comes back to you got to find a significant, an appropriate solution to this. Otherwise, you end up having unintended consequences that end up hurting employees as well as employers. And I think that's where we need to try to figure out the problem. And part of the solution may be more analysis of the points you just made, to see if, in fact, it does protect the existing JPAs. And on the ones going forward, if they can't reach agreement, it's a pretty big burden on Calpers to try to figure that out. I think what may happen is you may end up having the unintended consequence of driving new JPAs to not be in Calpers and to find other solutions, potentially DC plans. I'm not sure that's where we want to go. I don't think we necessarily want that particular conclusion to occur. So I think that probably the best move at this point is to let's give it this 30 days, see how the legislation moves. And I would ask the chair to direct the staff to work with the stakeholders, come back in 30 days and in June, and see where we are then, to see if we reached a conclusion. And maybe your position will prevail, and maybe not. But let's see where it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Slayton. Mr. Costigan?
I was going to ask the same things along the lines of Mr. Slayton, that we would, since no action be required, just direct the staff to continue to work it. And actually, a couple of issues that I had was to look at the contractual relationship tied into the retroactivity and the apportionment. The other question I have, Mr. Jacobs, is we keep talking about our practice, and I just want to make sure that the practice that we have as it relates to JPAs is how have we looked at either codifying that or how have we put that practice into place. I want to make sure that we haven't developed a regulation that it's a practice. So I want to ensure, I'm looking at, through you, Terry, at Marlene, that the process has met what we keep talking about guidelines to process. I want to know what the process is, but at this point I would echo Mr. Slayton's comments, and I don't think any motion is necessary and that you just take no action on it. Because actually taking a no position means we took a position, and I'm not taking any position. I just say give the staff another 30 days. That would be my recommendation.
All right, so thank you. Speakers? Marlene, if you could come back up. Oh, Brad, I'm sorry. No, because we're going to go through the next one first, Terry. But thank you. So, Brad, I think you heard the board's direction, which is we would like to not have this an action item and have you guys go back, work with the stakeholders, bring it back in June for us. Is that okay?
I said at the onset, this is an important discussion. We all have a mutual goal, so we'll work with the stakeholders and bring something back in June.
Great. Thank you, Brad.
Sure.
So we are on 6D, Senate Bill 1413, Public Employees Retirement Pension Pre-Funding.
So, Madam Chair, members of the committee, the second bill before you is Senate Bill 1912, authored by Senator Nielsen and sponsored by the California Special Districts Association. As we've mentioned in the past, this bill would authorize Calpers to establish and implement a pension pre-funding trust to help our employers invest and pre-fund their future pension contributions. Our employers have asked for this. It's a tool that they believe is important to help them with their pension costs, especially given the increases expected over the next 5 years. Our team had some initial concerns about some amendments that were added that called for the trust to have 4 investment options, including one that would match the asset allocation of the PERF. We believe we've been working with the stakeholders on that language. We believe that we can come to a workable solution that satisfies them and also gives this board and our investment staff some flexibility around those investment options. So we're asking that the committee take a support, if amended, position on this piece of legislation. And I'll stop there and ask for any questions.
All right, thank you. Mr. Slayton?
Thank you. We need to do this. This needs to happen. Everybody benefits from it. So just to get it started, I'd like to move staff's recommendation.
Okay. The staff's recommendation has been moved by Mr. Slayton, seconded by Mr. Miller. We can discuss on the board in a minute. I have requests to speak from Dane Hutchings, Dorothy Johnson, Dylan Gibbons, and Terry Brennan. If you 4 want to come up. So I'm going to start with Dane.
If you don't mind.
Dylan says, well, that's not in order.
You know, Dane writes these things up. So, Chair, if you don't mind, Dylan Gibbons with the California Special Districts Association, sponsoring the bill. First, I'd like to start, this is a great bill. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank the staff for all of their work on this bill. Thank this board for hearing this, and thank you, Mr. Slayton, for moving to support this bill. When we brought this up a couple of months ago as a spot bill to assist this board in providing a tool for public agencies, we knew we had a lot of work ahead of us. And that work has been getting done. I'd like to thank Terry Brennan with SEIU for his efforts in working with employers and Calpers to help bring this bill to fruition. We still have some work to do to get it done. It's currently going to be heard in appropriations, and we're optimistic that we can get it to move forward. So thank you very much, and hopefully we can get your support on this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbons. Do I move down the line now, or is there a specific order you want?
That's all right.
The pleasure of the chair. Dorothy Johns with the California State Association of Counties. For the sake of time, I'll echo the comments of my colleague from the special districts, but I really want to emphasize how this came together as a collaborative solution and how critical this will be for our counties to give them another tool in their toolbox as they meet their pension obligations. So we appreciate the motion by Mr. Slayton. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Dane Hutchings, the League of California Cities. Again, echo the comments of my colleagues. I've come up here dozens of times asking for more tools. Local agencies have the ability to do this right now through a private company. Those companies, however, do charge a little bit of an administrative fee, and right now we're squeezing pennies. And so, seeing the success of the trust set up on the OPEB side is something that we've seen some great success in. Want to try to be able to provide as many tools as possible for our cities, and certainly support this measure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Brennan? What?
Mr. Slayton is not on the committee.
No, he's not.
So I'll move adoption of staff recommendation.
Oh, he's not on this committee? Yeah. And I still had to answer to him?
So, and it's seconded.
This way now.
Yeah. Mr. Costigan, yeah.
Sorry, I just woke up.
Okay, so now it's been moved by Mr. Costigan, seconded by Mr. Miller. Mr. Brennan.
Madam Chair and members, Terry Brennan on behalf of SEIU California, and unlike the last bill, there's general agreement on this one. I would say with one exception. When I was talking to your staff, we did not want Calpers to get in the business of chasing yield, which is what some of these agencies, do not kid yourself, are about. They think they can do better. They think they can earn more than you are in the perf. So the bill was amended in committee, not at my request, but by the author to restrict it to the 3 funds you had already done in the SERBIT. I think we'll come to agreement on language that basically says probably a number of funds, 3, I'm not sure, but that the risk and return profile won't exceed that in the highest sort of cert fund, so we're not out there. If they want to go out and chase 8, 10, 12% interest, they can do it with PARs and they can pay the fees. That's not your job in my estimation. So we'll get there. I believe Brad is correct. We're wordsmithing as of an hour ago.
Great.
Thank you.
Great. Mr. Slayton?
Sorry about that. I'm channeling last year when I was on the committee, so thought I would be grandfathered in.
Retroactivity.
Yeah, exactly. So, I think that the modifications need to happen, and I think we can work through those. Having one of the funds be equivalent to the PERF just doesn't work. Structurally, you can't do it because of private equity and real estate. So I think the others, again, the discretion needs to be by Calpers in the creating of those accounts. And I think that you see the experience of our investment office, how we've done OPEB, that we understand how to construct funds that take a reasonable amount of risk and don't try to shoot for the moon. That's not our objective here at CalPERS. So we just have to do it within our fiduciary guidelines, and I think it'll happen. So I encourage the committee to have a yes vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Mother.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Forgive me. I want to, first of all, thank Mr. Gibbons for sponsoring this bill. I think this is a really important bill for public employers and also for members. I've heard from locals all across the state that they also want their employers to have this option, and it's important for a couple of reasons. One is that CalPERS is a trusted manager of assets on behalf of public employees and public employers in this state. Number two, is that we generally do it for at a cheaper price than what's offered in the private sector. And as you say, everyone's looking to save money these days. It's a particularly tough environment, and employers and employees alike want to know that the funds are being managed effectively at a low cost. And number 3, and this is really important for employers, is that the assets can be accounted for on the CAFR, can offset the liabilities, which cannot be done in the private sector. And so that is, I think, a really important advantage that a Calpers administered 115 trust can offer. So for those reasons, I completely support this bill. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you all. I appreciate it. So we have a motion on the floor. This is an action item. All those in favor of the staff recommendation action item?
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, motion carries. We are moving on to 6E. God, almost forgot we had 6E. Ms. Malm. Nobody wants to speak on it?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the Finance Administration Committee. Kim Malm, Calpers team member. Before you is an action item to amend the notice of election for the 2018 state, school, and public agency elections. At the February FAC meeting, the board approved the current notice of elections, and it was sent out to the employers on March 26th, kicking off the election cycle. Since the conclusion of the 2017 member-at-large election, the Board Elections team has listened to feedback regarding the paper ballot intake and processing process. We have determined that we can make a process change for the 2018 state, school, and public agency election instead of waiting for the full program review scheduled to be conducted during the 2020 election off year. This process change includes the return envelopes will be scanned for the barcode only in order to ensure that not more than one vote. They will not be opened. The sealed paper ballot return envelopes will be secured at Integrity Voting Systems, headquarters in Everett, Washington, until the conclusion of the voting period. Beginning at 9 a.m. on October 2nd for the primary and December 11th if a runoff election is necessary, the sealed signed envelopes containing the voted ballots will be opened, the ballots removed and processed at the Integrity Voting Systems headquarters in Everett, Washington. Public viewing is permitted through this opening process. Upon completion of the paper ballot process, the electronic tabulation will be held at Everyone Counts headquarters in La Jolla, California. The time for the electronic tabulation and public viewing of the electronic tabulation will be announced promptly following the completion of the paper ballot process. Due to changes in the paper ballot intake process and the additional time it will now take to process the ballots, it will no longer be a couple of hours like it was in this last election. It will now be a few days. The candidate random drawing has changed from October 4th to October 9th to accommodate these additional days. In accordance with the California Code of Regulations, Section 554.37D, any amendments to the notice of election require an amendment to the notice of election and adopted by the board. Once approved, the amended notice of election will be transmitted to employers for distribution. This concludes my presentation, Madam Chair, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Sure, we do have one question, Ms. Brown.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Malm. I did have a chance to talk with Mr. Hoffner earlier this morning to tell him thank you for the change in this process, for listening to both board members and our constituents who love to vote, and for really taking a look at the process and fixing it by actually counting the paper ballots. I believe, what percentage of them are voted via paper? Via the mail? I mean, a large percent.
The majority, 72%, I think.
Okay. So I appreciate you making sure those ballots are secured and then opened after the election. The election has concluded, and then you say a process. So is that Are they going to actually be counted in Everett, Washington? It just says a process, so I'm not sure what that process is.
So the envelopes will be sliced open, the ballots will be removed, they will be scanned into the system, and any adjudication that's necessary will be done in Washington to those ballots, and it will be uploaded into the database like it was in this last year, but it won't happen until after the conclusion. And then we will go to La Jolla, as we did last year, and they will do their electronic tabulation process, which will take the paper ballot database and the IVR and the online, and combine them and give us a report on the findings, on the results.
So just so you know, I still have some concerns about the electronic tabulation process. And then I also wanted to know, are you going to be able to have time to fix the script for the phone voting? I know we got that data, and I'm hoping we'll be able to get that fixed before this election, especially with the fact that names are actually not mentioned until about the 25th prompt, and also that the volume levels are much different depending upon where you are in the process. You couldn't hear, it was very confusing, and they kept calling it a contest. By the way, the majority of our voters are older. They're worried about contests, Publishers Clearinghouse and other ones, and so they hang up the phone. So, and I'm wondering if we have any data analytics about how many no votes, how many hang-ups, and the results by method. So all those things are very important.
So a contest was for the member at large and would be only for that election, because there's 2 elections within the same phone voting. Every other election is a single election, and that's why they use the word election and the word contest in the voting for the mail. We have been working with them on the script, because we receive feedback from the constituents in regards to being able to vote immediately versus having to go through all of the steps. And so Mr. Darby provided some great information to us, and we are trying to make that change, or we are making that change with the vendor, so that the members can vote immediately as opposed to going through all the steps. They have to first log on. Well, they have to first log on in order to do that, but yeah.
And then volume was the other one. We want to make sure that the volume is loud enough and can be adjusted. It clearly was not. If anybody took the time to listen to all those audio prompts, Doug did. And I did. Some of them are very, very soft and hard to hear. So,
thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. I don't have any more requests to speak on this item. So we have an action item on the table for amendment of notice of election.
I'll move it.
It's moved by Mr. Costigan. I'm going to say seconded by Mr. Gillihan. Seeing no discussion, all those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? All right, motion carries. Excuse me. We are moving on to agenda item 7A, annual stakeholder perception survey report. And I think that's Brad and Kelly.
Yeah. Madam Chair, Brad Pacheco, Calpers team. I'm joined by my colleague David Takeharts with our stakeholder relations team. Before you is our annual perception survey. I know that it's been a long day and that we have one other committee meeting, so I'll turn to the pleasure of the committee. We're more than happy to go through the presentation, or we're also happy to take questions, whatever the desire of the committee is.
Pardon me? I think we can just have people ask questions. I think I've read it. Anybody? Oh, you have a question? All right, Mr. Costigan.
All right, Mr. Pacheco, first of all, I appreciate the report in this. As the chair said, we've read the report, and I was actually just looking at some of the press comments that are out there. And I just want to sort of reiterate, there's this inverse action and stakeholder response. The more you actually take action, the more you're moving towards what we believe are positive actions, you're going to get people that push back. And so what I read in the report, first of all, is I like the engagement. I would like to see the number of employers, considering the number we have, I'd like to see ways on how we could get the response higher. But I would say the fact that 82% of us still see us in a positive light, I think you guys have done a really good job. I do want to commend the social media team, as I was actually just joking with our chair that you're the king of cryptocurrency. And see, he knows exactly what I'm talking about. You all do a fantastic job, and I think as our members, as we evolve, we have to continue to stay ahead of what is the media curve. And I don't mean as in TV media, but whatever media that we're using to continue to communicate. I have to say, from an email perspective, or the perspectives that comes out, it's more is how are we moving to new visual mediums? How are we using apps? But I just want to say overall, it's good. I think the report was just fantastic in outlining trends and all of that. So, Madam Chair, I know this is just an informational item, but again, I just want to appreciate the hard work you and the entire team is doing on the communications front.
Thank you very much.
I also want to tell you guys I appreciate the hard work that went into this. I think, as I was reading through this, I think it was last year, we had some of our members not happy with us. And I think that, as I recall, and as I read in the Sacramento Bee today, that was as a result of us having to reduce pension benefits for these smaller JPAs that was occurring. So this year, as we're trying to shore up the fund and doing what we're supposed to be doing to make sure that we can deliver our benefits, it's come down on our employer side, and I think that's probably a result of what we are seeing here, or that's the result of that. So I think that perception will eventually change. And as we continue to work with the cities and counties, I will tell you, I've been here for 4 years now, and it's the first time I've seen the cities and counties really, really involved. So they may be not happy with us right now, but they have been very engaged with us and have had wonderful response from our staff and Marcy and everyone. So I think they should be pretty happy about what they are getting from us, and I think that this will change. Their perception will eventually change. Ms. Paquin?
Thank you. I also agree. It is nice to see more activity and more communication with the employers. I think that's been very important. And I was looking on page 11, the last page of the presentation, the opportunities and action steps. I was curious what additional touch points for stakeholders you're planning on, and
Thank you. Members of the committee and Madam Chair and visiting board members, David Takearts, Calpers team member. So one thing that we're exploring right now is adding a local elected officials track to our annual educational forum. This is our annual conference, which has traditionally been marketed more to the operational level staff of employers, and recently we've added in more of a component for the professional management leadership, but we're looking to bring in truly that elected official piece this year. We're also developing more materials that we can distribute to these folks so that they could have a quick understanding of how the complicated Calpers mechanism works. Our office has produced an excellent 4-page document that lays out some of the foundational and core numbers of where the system is today, but this would be a broader piece that would really kind of explain it from A to Z from the perspective of somebody who's been newly elected mayor or city council member, something like that, that just kind of goes through it and just gives a pure straight line facts about how the process works at Calpers.
And when you communicate with the members and stakeholders, specifically with the elected officials, are you just sending it to the city manager's office and assuming that they share it with their elected board, or is it going directly to the elected members?
We have several different communication channels. We maintain a database of the 4 or 5 top folks at the various public agencies and at the school districts. So that would be the city manager, finance director, HR director, or their equivalents at the districts, counties, or schools. So we have their emails that we curate ourselves and we can communicate with them. For the local electeds right now, we really count on our employer agency and employer association partners. Dane, Dylan, Dorothy, the folks that you've heard from today. So they're really a great conduit for us to get information to those local elected folks.
Okay. And I'm assuming that if you have a good response at the community, at the education forum with the elected officials, that they'll become a bigger part of the database and outreach.
That's correct.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mr. Jones?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, thank you for the report put together really well. I do have one question on slide 9 or page 9. It's 127 of the iPad, and looking at the last item, do you have confidence in answers you received from Calpers? And I was wondering if you could take a little deeper dive in that. Where is that coming from? Is it dealing with health, or is it dealing with pensions, or is it, what's causing that, if you can?
Yeah. So let me start there, and David can jump in. I think there was a remark made yesterday by one of our stakeholders about member confidence, and want to distinguish those results from what you're seeing here. So we saw an uptick on members' confidence on almost all of the long-term questions. This particular graph on stakeholders is really asking our stakeholder leaders, so the leaders of RPEA, the leaders of the California State Retiree Associations. It's not necessarily the 50,000 members that we randomly select. And so I think that, we engage with them on a regular basis. They're very close to the material here. You hear some of the concerns that they have. And so it's something that we need to work on with those associations to better understand the concerns they have and how we can make sure that we provide the answers that they need, and that gets communicated out to their membership. So it's a little mixed, as you can see from the graph. The other thing I should note, and we don't have this detail here, we only received responses from 10 stakeholders this year through the survey out of about 75 to 80 that we asked to participate. So this is I don't want to, this is a relatively small sample group that you're seeing here, but still it's important.
Sure. And so that is a very small sample size, and being aware of our stakeholders who appear to be very active, because I see them, and so why aren't they responding? Have you asked a question at one of your stakeholder meetings about why they're not responding to this survey?
I don't know that we've asked that follow-up question, but we certainly will.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'll certainly remind them the next year about this conversation that we're having right now. Yeah, so I think there may have been, pardon me, an element of survey fatigue, because one practice that we have in place very well with all of our stakeholder groups is when various committees want to know kind of what is stakeholder sentiment on any particular topic, we will often create a survey and ask our stakeholder partners to push that out on our behalf and to take it themselves. So I think that to a certain extent, this may have been somewhat missed in the cavalcade of surveys that we asked them to do on our behalf.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Ms. Mather?
Thank you. I'm really encouraged by what you were just sharing, Mr. Takearts, about the new primer on Calpers for newly elected city council members and other electeds. One of the challenges I think we continue to face is how do we communicate with labor at the local level, labor leaders at the local level? Because obviously we spend a lot of time with those who are here sort of at their state council in Sacramento, but it's hard, I know it's hard for us to keep up with who is elected at each local agency, at each bargaining unit. But I do think that there might be different understanding or concerns at the locals, and those, they represent our members as well as the state folks do. So I would suggest that we work to improve how we communicate with them, on an ongoing basis, and perhaps for newly elected leaders, to also share with them this primer on Calpers. That might be a good introduction. Some of them might have been on the board of the local for a while, might have more familiarity, but others maybe not. But then also sort of as things are changing, as we are reaching out to stakeholders around any significant decision that this board might be undertaking, for example, the amortization policy, to figure out how we can communicate better at the local level with our members, I think would be important.
That's great. Point well taken. We'll look at it from both the employer and the labor side.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. So seeing no more questions from the board, we do have a request to speak from Mr. Lynn, if you'd come down. Are you Mr. Darby? All right, I will replace you. You are irreplaceable.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and board members. Al Darby, Vice President, Retired Public Employees Association. We are pleased with some of the results in the stakeholder questions. However, the one related to confidence that your retirement money is safe, I think we've expressed in the past and in other committee meetings here that we are concerned about the safety of our PERF, and our members certainly express that to us. So anything we can do to reassure our members that the PERF is going to improve and reach the healthy level of at least 80% funded, that's certainly going to improve the results next year in that particular category. The other concern is the rather precipitous drop here in the confidence in what they hear about Calpers. And the only thing I could say there is that some of the negative press that's come out just recently is certainly contributing to that. And we certainly need to try to put that behind us with good relations on the board, and perhaps a little stronger PR campaign out there. Perhaps if we do produce some improvement in those healthcare rates over the next 30 days, then that should be certainly, advertised to the world. If we produce some impressive investment gains, that as well should be better communicated to the outside world. I'm sure, I feel that we are a little bit weak in the PR category. Thank you.
Thank you. Point taken, Mr. Darby. So that brings us to agenda item 8, summary of committee direction. Ms. Timberlake D'Amato.
I've taken down one, although it wasn't directed at me, which was to work with the stakeholders on the JPA legislation and come back in June with, I guess, the results of that work. And I don't think it's going to be an information item. I think in June is what I had written down.
Yeah, I don't know that it's a support or action item in June.
It would be an action item.
It would, but it's an information item now. It would be an action item
in June. Okay.
Probably.
Anything else?
Yeah. I don't believe so. Anybody's okay? Nothing that I see.
Great.
Is there any? I'm sorry.
I was going to say they said they could be done in 15 minutes if you want to start at 3:55.
Okay. Seeing no public request for public comment, this meeting of the Finance Administration Committee is adjourned, and talent management is going to be starting at 3:55. 3:45? 3:55? He was going to do 3:45. Yeah.